I will just check if we are live on.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Carvan and Beyond the Myth workshop. This is a workshop that we started about 8 weeks ago as our fight against communalization of Indian history and mythification of history that has been going on social media and now even in NCRT books. We decided that there should be a workshop where everybody is invited to join and they can register and be part of these workshop rooms, classrooms type workshops where we get to the basics and slowly and gradually we move from prehistory to Indus Valley to ancient India and medieval and now finally to modern India and contemporary India. And this was a series where we host historians as well as us who are history students and try to bridge the gap that exists between academia and popular history. So, in continuation of that, we have been doing this lecture series, guest lecture series, where we are hosting some of our leading intellectuals of our times. For modern India, we hosted Professor Mridula Mukherjee and Professor Aditya Mukherjee and Professor Amar Faruqi before today's lecture. Today's lecture is very important for many reasons. First, that we have the honor of hosting one of the intellectual giants of history of science as well as history of revolutionaries and intellectuals like Maulana Azad, Professor S. Irfan Habib, who is joining us from Delhi. And he is somebody who has worked on for a long time. He worked on history of science and then he also worked on Bhagat Singh's revolutionary years, and he's written books on the life and times of Bhagat Singh. And I think before the first script that came out, the dedicated book that has come out in honor of Professor Habib, there was this book which came from Alif on Maulana Azad, which actually became one of those reads that you can actually look and read very easily and understand the contributions of one of those sidelined national leaders, sadly, in today's time. And today, Professor Habib is going to continue with that legacy of intellectual resistance that he has been putting up for many, many years now. He has been attacked on social media for his study of history, and which happens with every historian today. This is the sign of anti-intellectualism that is going on in India today. But today's lecture is more like a conversation with all of you on spreading hate through misreadings of the past, which has become a norm today. Because I was going through this book, which is in front of me right now. I was trying to write a critique of the new NCRT book. This is class 8th NCRT. And it talks about a lot of hate for those who came from outside and as invaders first. And but for the British it is always the arrival of the British, never the invasion of the British. The British never invaded. It is only the Mughals who invaded, for or the Turkish Mongols who invaded India, according to the NCRT. We'll talk more about these issues in today's session. So, without further ado, thank you so much, Professor Habib, for always accepting our invitation and for always being there in
Thank
support.
you.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ishan. Thank you, Ishan, once again, because I had the privilege of joining you a couple of, I think, year or two ago. As you pointed out in your introduction, because we are in a period in a phase of history, contemporary history, where history is more important, past is more important than present, because we are not so much bothered about the present or the future. We are more concerned about the past. And so that has forced lots of us who are in the business of looking at the past, uh, from ancient to medieval to modern times, or even contemporary period, to guard our discipline and to really see it is not vandalized irreparably, though it has been already done because the institutions which are in command, in control, some of us have no control over that. So we can only critique them and question them. That's what most of us are doing. In today's lecture, I thought we should talk about how history is being used as a tool to spread hate and to divide people, to segregate people, communities, one against the other, all in the name of history, imagined history, not even actual history. So today I will briefly try to touch upon the issue which we are going to deal with, and then talk about modern period later on, but little introduction uh, how the medieval period, the Mughal period particularly, is being handled, because that is the main target for these people, because that is the history which is most useful for them for their contemporary political concerns. So the misuse of the past for the promotion of present political fortunes is now rampant in our country, as I said earlier. Not that past has not been misused earlier, but a distinct change has taken place in its usage, in its use. Now, history is being misinterpreted to generate hate against a section of our population. Earlier, when people talk about the predominance of the left was doing it according to their ideological concerns, but it was not really spreading hate against a section of our population. That was never an agenda. Today, that significant change has taken place. We in India are not we in India are not alone. In many parts of the world, democratic societies are becoming increasingly polarized in an us versus them landscape that cuts across political and religious lines. So we are not actually the only country. There are others doing almost similar things. The Islamic far right in countries such as Pakistan, Indonesia, Maldives, the Christian far right in the US and Western Europe, the Buddhist far right in Myanmar and Sri Lanka, and the Hindu far right in India are feeding on people's sentiments of being offended. Now, that is a tool which is used again and again based on their perception of how freely the religious and ethnic minorities can practice their faith and culture. This sense of offendedness can often be amplified by the ease of communication on social media. That is something very, very significantly available, and it is very useful as we all use it all the time, but it is very, very dangerous as well. In India, more than elsewhere, history has become a potent weapon to spread hate against the so-called enemies. The history of this trend is not new. It began with the colonial history writing and got further aggravated from the early 20th century onwards. As I said above, seeds of this malaise were sown few hundred years back in history when James Mill slotted our historical period as Hindu civilization, Muslim civilization, and British civilization. And British civilization was not Christian according to them. Reading of our past became a battlefield among various groups vying for control, particularly between the Orientalists and the utilitarians. And there were a group of British philosophers dominant in the 19th century, the utilitarians, as I said. They were convinced that the coming of the British to India was a godsend, as British administration and legislation would end the backwardness of India. They believed and also extensively propagated that the coming of the British will end despotism and tyranny rampant in India for centuries. And this was being done as a backdrop to what I'm going to come now. And this tyranny was all because of the Muslim rule, particularly the Mughals, who were at their weakest when the British began their inroads in the 18th century. The colonial administrators, who were also the chroniclers of the times, weaved a web of history that left a permanent mark on the Hindu Muslim relations. They bequeathed to us a sordid saga of our past that was bloodied and permanently infested with communal hatred. This is the whole narrative they tried to weave. Among the utilitarians, James Mill, whom I referred to earlier, was the most distinguished name in terms of influencing Indian historical thinking. What is perhaps the most significant aspect of Mill's history of British India was that, in a sense, it laid the foundations of a communal interpretation of Indian history and thus provided the historical justification of the two nation theory. It also sowed the seeds of hatred in the name of communalized history that continues to haunt us even today. The ancient India was also projected as the most virtuous period of history, and this was a concerted plan. It was part of an agenda that you make a distinction between the ancient and the medieval period. The ancient India was also projected as the most virtuous period of history, and the arrival of the Muslims decimated this Hindu golden age. And that's how it all began. This writing of history also conveniently makes the few centuries of Buddhist history invisible, mainly because it had no significant use in promoting the divisive history. Buddhist history, you can do away with it, very conveniently. You don't have to really talk about it, which comes in handy to boost the present political fortunes. The hate that is generated out of these outdated colonial views with a falsified historical past is a formidable tool to build vote banks and construct a new political identity. Another most rampant hate tool is a skewed definition of nationalism, where again distortion of history comes in handy. A section of our population is declared alien and not truly Indian because their faiths originated beyond the borders of India. I need to remind those who pander to this hateful agenda what Bal Gangadhar Tilak talked about the alienness, and he was a father of Indian nationalism. What he said, what he had to say about who is alien. While delivering a speech in Ahmednagar in 1916, and I discovered this while I was doing my volume on anthology on nationalism a couple of years back. So he was delivering a lecture in 1916 in Ahmednagar, and while delivering this lecture, he talked about who is an alien and who is an Indian, and he tried to make a distinction. And this is essential for people today. All those communalists, all those so-called Indian nationalists who talk about nationalism around religious boundaries or religious divisions. And I would like to read out this. This is a longish passage, but this is a very useful one, and which will give you an idea what Tilak actually thought about it in 1916, as early as 1916. He says, the Mohammedan kings who ruled here in Ahmednagar, and he's speaking in Ahmednagar, came to and lived in this country and at least desired that local industries should thrive. The religion may be different. By alien, I do not mean alien in religion. He who does what is beneficial to the people of this country, be he a Mohammedan or an Englishman, is not an alien. Alienness has to do with interests. Alienness is certainly not concerned with white or black skin. Alienness is not concerned with religion. Alienness is not concerned with trade or profession. I do not consider him an alien who wishes to make an arrangement whereby that country in which he has to live, his children have to live, and his future generations have to live, may see good days and be benefited. He may not perhaps go with me to the same temple to pray to God. Perhaps there may be no intermarriage or interdining between him and me. All these are minor questions, according to Tilak. But if a man is exerting himself for the good of India and takes measures in that direction, I do not consider him an alien. So he very clearly makes out that the identity is not dependent on your religion. Identity is dependent on your interest. If you are dedicated to the country you live in, you identify with that country, you consider that country your home, then you cannot be an alien. You just can't be. And this is what is happening today. That's why I thought I should read this out, because Tilak is is father of our nationalism. And if he says something like this, then all those uh, born again nationalists today need to reconsider their own definition of nationalism. This statement from none other than Tilak directly questions those who see religion and nationalism as interchangeable, where majoritarian nationalism makes precedence over other religions, whose practitioners can at the most be tolerated but not considered as true nationalists. It is obvious that here they target Muslims and Christians listed as enemies of India by Golwalkar himself many years ago. In this situation, we have a clear choice to make between Tilak and Golwalkar. You know? So there is a choice one can make whom you want to follow, Bal Gangadhar Tilak or or Golwalkar, an RSS ideologue. So this is a choice before us Indians, and I hope we know whom to believe. One who didn't discriminate on the ground of religion, or the other who spread hate in the name of religion. The rise of BJP as a national party over 4 decades from 1980 has been marked by its commitment to religion based Hindu nationalism that seeks to define Indian identity and culture purely in terms of Hindu values and leaves no room for any other. This process has, in turn, led to a sustained polarization around religion and political ideology that takes offense at perceived historical injustices and, on that basis, demonizes present day minorities. There is a concerted plan to link the present day Muslims as the descendants of Mughal Emperor Babur, and we see it very often, pejoratively calling them Babur ki aulad. This hatred driven campaign hardly cares to see the diversity of Muslims in this country. The Muslims in this country have nothing to do with Babur at all, even if you go by demography or by the diversity which the Indian Muslims one can see that see very visible. A diversity that clearly establishes the rootedness of Indian Muslims. This blatant misreading of history is a conscious attempt to construct nationalism and national identity by demonizing and alienating Muslims, dubbing them as descendants of the medieval invaders. Let us begin by discussing this insidious and exclusive nationalism that runs counter to the composite nationalism we inherited from the freedom struggle. And I will talk about this composite nationalism later. Hindutva proponents are committed to rewrite history to promote their own hateful agenda. Their brand of majoritarian nationalism is seen today as a rightful replacement for the much cherished composite nationalism that was our strength during the freedom struggle against the divisive nationalisms, both Hindu and Islamic. These identity based nationalisms, which includes religious, linguistic, or even regional identity, are just pseudo nationalisms and shouldn't be called nationalisms at all. I raised this in the beginning itself as it has overwhelmed us in many ways, mostly negatively. There are concerted attempts to use nationalism as a divisive tool where fellow citizens are declared as anti nationals on flimsy pretexts. Our religious identity has become the foremost marker of our national identity. One of our well known historians on the subject, Eric Hobsbawm, wrote once that history in the hands of nationalists can kill more people than incompetent builders. He was, like Gurudev Tagore, aptly clear that narrow national identities are created to generate hate against a section of population on the basis of religion, region, or language. At the turn of the last century, Rabindranath Tagore saw nationalism as a source of misery, destruction, and the hate among people. Unfortunately, we are deep into that hate now, despite early warnings from Tagore and later Gandhi as well, who asked in 1925, and it was a lecture he delivered in a club, in Mikano Club in Calcutta, where the title of his lecture was, "Is it essential to hate someone to be a nationalist? No? Is it necessary that you hate somebody to call yourself a nationalist? You don't have to." Mahatma was categorical in articulating his concept of nationalism when he said that my idea of nationalism is that my country may become free free, that if need be, the whole of the country may die so that the human race may live. There is no room here for race hatred. Let that be my nationalism. Now, that's how he defined nationalism. There is no place for hate at all in the name of nationalism, whether it is based on religion or region or caste or any category. So there is a selective reading of the past. This is another point I want to raise, which conforms to the present political concerns of the ruling party and its cohorts. There is a conscious attempt to see everything in history with a communal perspective. Medieval history of India is about bloodshed and barbarism against the Hindus, while Muslim rulers have to be cruel. Exceptions are noticed with a terrible remark in some cases where it is said that a particular ruler was kind despite being a Muslim. Now, this is a standard usage. You find so many times in several books over the years. This delusion about the perpetual religious conflict over 700 years of Muslim rule works like an opiate for some people, where daily miseries of life are forgotten and the relentless demonizing of a section becomes a national pastime. During the past few years, a big chunk of our population has internalized the hate that is spewed by spreading falsehoods about history, mainly through WhatsApp forwards. Now, our medieval past has been reduced merely to a Hindu Muslim conflict zone. There is nothing else, where the majority Hindus were brutalized by the barbaric Muslim rulers. This is the only identity of this 400 years of 500 years of medieval rule. Today, the Hindu communalists refuse to study the past in its historical context. They rather want to paint everything in history as just black and white. There were there were subdued and persecuted Hindus, and there were cruel and horrendous Muslims. And the present Muslims are the progeny of these barbaric ancestors. So this is the standard, very simplistic idea about the past, which is being spread, and the today's Muslims are linked to that barbaric past, and very blatantly. It is around this sweeping generalization and invented history that hate is generated through the devious rhetoric and lies against the fellow citizens who happen to be Muslims. Terribly specious arguments are used to link the contemporary fellow citizens with the 16th and 17th century Mughals. We can see a concerted strategy in this generation of hate through the misreading of the past. It's a very clear pattern which we can see. The Hindutva Brigade gives the past to the British colonial oppression and exploitation and blames the Muslims for all the wrongs of the present. This is another very significant feature of reading history, that you don't talk of 200 years of colonization from East India Company to the British rule from 1857, 1858 onwards. There is very little mention about that. History starts and ends with Mughals. That is a standard pattern. The misleading homogeneity, as it is perceived by the Hindu supremacists about themselves, is also followed while defining the Muslim enemy, who is depicted as flat and politically homogeneous. As a matter of fact, both the claims are fallacious. To spew venom and generate hate against the Muslims, the inner contradictions and diversities of both the religions are deliberately overlooked. The homogeneity is not found either among Hindus or among Muslims. On the contrary, the Muslim rule, particularly the Mughal era, was a collaborative project between the Hindus and Muslims, Muslim ruling elite, ruling nobility. Though emperor was a Muslim, there were Hindu, mostly Rajput Mansabdars, who held important administrative positions as well. And this number went up during Aurangzeb's time. And I am not here to defend Aurangzeb at all. Well, he stood for those medieval values, and we don't want to see any democratic governance in his rule. He was like any other 16th, 17th century ruler, little like worse than others, but obviously representing that period. And Meena Bhargav, one of our historians, she wrote a little book on Aurangzeb, where she counters the hate being spread by a deliberate portrayal of Mughal emperor as prejudice against Hindus. Well, she's trying to, well, she worked on Aurangzeb, and she tries to, like Audrey Tushke, who's done recently a little book on that. She did that earlier. Regardless of historical accuracy, makes it difficult to explain the increase in the number of Rajput Mansabdars. And this is something which I often use, that when we talk of Aurangzeb, we also need to remember that when he was fighting his, and I want to talk about this because we need to know, because in popular uh, debates and discussions, when people face non-historians, non-specialists, when they encounter such problems, then these are arguments one can raise, which people normally don't know or deliberately want to avoid. Like when Aurangzeb was fighting his brothers for succession, he had put his father Shah Jahan in prison. He killed most of his brothers. In this battle, look at the Rajput Mansabdars. Large number of them were actually supporting Aurangzeb because they knew that Dara Shikoh is a scholar. You know, he may be somebody who translated Upanishads. He was a philosopher. He was more interested in he was an erudite young prince, but he was not a very brave or competent general, according to them. So their future is safer with Aurangzeb. So they supported Aurangzeb in huge numbers. Now, we are seeing Hindu and Muslim today. They saw their interest. They didn't see Islam of Aurangzeb, or Aurangzeb didn't see the Hinduism of Rajputs. So they were together for the sake of power. So this is the true character of that period. Not that high-handedness didn't take place, or Aurangzeb didn't behave as a communal ruler. He did on many instances. He behaved similarly with the Shia Muslims as well. No, he was a fanatic. And the fanatic has to hate everybody who is other than him, no? Who doesn't represent the Islam or the faith he represents himself. So he questioned all of them, whether it was Shia Muslims or whether they were Hindus or Sikhs for that matter. Now, but there are instances which this Meena Bhargav finds out that Akbar had a noble and somebody who worked for him, his in his civil service, uh, called Raghunath Ray, who was a Kayast Hindu, and he Aurangzeb was so moved by his death, and there is a instance which is quoted about this. Raghunath Ray not only supported Aurangzeb but also participated in several expeditions of the period. Aurangzeb honored him with the title of Raja, and and this is what I want to tell you. When Raghunath Ray died in 1664, the emperor, in his obituary written in Rukate Alamgiri, remembered him as the greatest administrator he had ever known. No? This is Aurangzeb writing about his favorite civil servant, who was a Hindu caste. So this is where lies the difference between Hindu and Muslim. He didn't follow that. He just found a competent person to work with. And so there are several instances like this. Even in the Battle of Succession, with his forebrother, as I said, large number of Rajputs supported him. There are thousands of Shishu Mandirs, and this is something which we don't take. What we are witnessing today is a result of a sustained demonization of a section of our population, a sustained effort to generate hate against a section of a population in the minds of young children, which happens from the age of 4 or 5. And this happens through the chain of these thousands of Shishu Mandirs which are working for the last several decades. They have been teaching history as a project of hate generation, and it is happening for decades. Now these schools are more empowered. Today, when you have a government in power, these schools are more empowered, and the hate project may be mainstreamed soon. And it has already been mainstreamed, actually. As a matter of fact, the core of this religious hate today lies in our past. Like one researcher did a short survey, Shobhan Saxena, a couple of years ago, on this issue. And he began by saying that such a hate project gives a hooligan a sense of purpose and a place in what he believes to be the larger scheme of things. Several years ago, there was a Shishu Mandir in West Delhi, run by the RSS, where the students perceived Indian history to be nothing but a conflict between Hindus and Muslims. Of course, they also carried an image of India as the oldest civilization in the world, the source of all knowledge and culture, an image that is behind the wish to make India Vishwa. No, this is actually a reflection of that idea you have instilled into the minds of a generation of Indians over the years. Such hate-filled and motivated history is taught in over 30,000 schools run by Vidya Bharati, and this number must have gone up by now by a few thousand more. An apex organization of the RSS, there are more than 80,000 teachers. Again, this number must be much more than 80,000 now, who teach such atrocious rubbish to over millions of students. The numbers must be much higher than projected a couple of years back. Even Ashoka is not spared by the proponents of Hindutva narrative. Like, well, I'm just giving this as an example, who are blatantly attacking him for weakening India by enunciating non-violence as a follower of Buddha. And this is raised by many. I've read several of the right-wing scholars. Nehru is dragged into controversy as well, because they can't do without Nehru at all, by whether they are studying the past or the present. It is proposed that after independence, historians were encouraged to further build up the legend of Ashoka the Great to provide a lineage to Nehru's socialist project. Now, this is something so funny, but very, very dangerous. It is difficult to explain how scholars in Europe, Australia, and the US universities were roped into this project by Nehru. Because Ashoka was being studied by people all over the world in different universities. How can all these people be part of Nehruvian agenda? Well, this is something which is spread. People lap it up because they don't make a distinction. They can't really understand what is being said. The RSS inspired narrative also uses the freedom struggle and partition to spew venom against the minorities. The Muslims who decided to stay back in India, and this is something important in the context of, I don't know, some of you must have seen. It is being discussed and debated in social media also, which Astak did a program just 3 days back, just I think 14th, day before the 15th August, Independence Day, where numbers were used, all forced numbers were used to project that the partition agenda of the Muslim League or the Muslims was actually a devious plan of Muslims. Many of them did want to go to Pakistan. They didn't want Pakistan. They stayed back here. They just wanted to create a nation in the name of their religion. The Hindus were driven out in larger numbers. Muslims from here went to Pakistan in much smaller numbers. Now, this is the narrative. And now, this history of partition, or the partition project itself, is incomplete, because it will be completed only when all the left behind Muslims are sent out from India to Pakistan. So this is the program which was telecast on Astak a day before independence. So we have reached that level where media is blatantly trying to use the partition history, the partition project to divide, to spread hate in the name of religion, just before, a day before independence. All Muslims, according to these hate mongers, should have moved to Pakistan, left India for the Hindus. Now, this was the idea behind the whole program. They have no clue that a large number of Muslims, particularly the Pasmanda section, which we hear very often these days, this Pasmanda word has become very fashionable among the ruling classes today. Well, they have found something very new, as if something new has been discovered. Pasmanda Muslims lived in this country for centuries. They stayed away from the divisive politics of the Muslim League. A recent research paper dealt with the extent of support for partition in the United Provinces, which clearly debunks the hate mongers who claim that the majority of Muslims wanted Pakistan. There was a paper published, a short paper published in EPW recently by Anil Maheshwari, who happens to be my old friend as well. And he was a journalist. So he did a paper, and EPW published it, where he says, and I quote him, Muslims in the United Provinces Assembly elections of 1946 did not vote overwhelmingly for the Muslim League, which was spearheading the movement for the creation of Pakistan. Voters constituting only 5% of the Muslim population cast their votes for the Muslim League, as per the official report of the elections in 1946. So, so this is a fact that a large number of people did not vote for Muslim League. First of all, what was the franchise? The franchise was so limited. It was no universal franchise. People who could go and vote, cast their vote, number was very small, both Hindu and Muslim. Out of those, 5% people only voted. Most of them were left out. So to say that the majority of the Muslims wanted Pakistan, and they were actually with Muslim League. Muslim League is a absolutely bogus campaign. Sadly, and I want to add here that when we talk of partition, and this is something which I have raised in this book, which you just showed, Maulana Azad, and one chapter deals with this particular issue, that large number of Muslims were actually, Maulana Azad was not alone. This is something which I had to debunk, and I tried to do it in one chapter. The Muslim League and Jinnah deliberately spread this word among Muslims that Maulana Azad is a showboy of the Congress. Except for him, all Muslims are with us, which is absolutely false. There were people like Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. There was Allah Baksh Samru of Sindh. There were so many other people. The whole Darul Uloom, Deoband. You may not talk of it very highly today, but it was a very different institution during the freedom struggle. They were all with Maulana Azad. Most of the Masmada Muslims, the Ansari Biradri, the Qurayshis, and others, they were all part of Darul Uloom. And I have tested this while I was doing this book, that among the Ansari community or the Quraishi community or the Mansuri community, they're all Pasmanda Muslim communities, craftsmen and artisans. Majority of these families are not divided. And I did a field work also a little bit. I talked to quite a few families in areas like Meerut, Muzaffarnagar, and Saharanpur, this area. And you could hardly find a family who had anybody in Pakistan. While the Ashraf, the Sayyids, the Pathans, the higher caste, Sheikhs, you will not, rarely you will find a family which is not divided, including my own. They're all divided because they were all professional people. They were all people who were actually scared of losing something. This section had no such fears. Why should they go to an unknown place? Yeah. because they are not going to lose it. They used to earn their bread, daily bread every day. They had no assets, no property, no job. They were artisans. So on that count, the population in UP, Western UP, is 26% Muslims, while the whole of Uttar Pradesh is 19%. Despite the fact that this part was very close to Punjab, where all the violence was taking place. Despite that, so this is something which we need to talk about, debunking this whole agenda that all Muslims wanted partition and all Muslims who live here today are actually living illegally. They should have gone long back to Pakistan because they asked for it. Then, even among the Ashraf, there were people who were committed to India. They consciously decided. They had a choice to choose nationalities. Well, the Hindu majority didn't have a choice. Muslims had a choice. Uh, And those who stayed back made a conscious choice to call India their home. So this is something which we forget. We don't even take this into account. Even nationalism, as I said in the beginning, is being redefined to exclude a section of our population. The composite nationalism, the legacy from our freedom struggle, is being replaced by Savarkar's idea of nationalism that was based on the divisive idea of Pitra Bhumi and Punya Bhumi, which left the Muslims and Christians out of its ambit. While our nationalism was inclusive, that reflected the diversity and plurality of India, it acknowledged the heterogeneity at all levels, political, cultural, as well as religious, and conceded them space and respect to flourish. Simultaneously, we saw the rise of two religion-based nationalisms during our freedom struggle, Hindu and Muslim. Both had been deeply influenced by the colonial projection of the monolithic and segregated communities of Hindus and Muslims. This is how the British defined us. They in their writings, the imperialist writings, the colonial writings, they defined Hindus and Muslims as two communities, two nations. And I call this whole partition a collaborative agenda of the British and the Muslim League from 1906 till 1947. It was patronized by the British, and it saw the ultimate end with the patronage of the British when the Mountbatten decided finally to divide India. Right? The whole project began from 1905 with the partition of Bengal. 47 was not the first partition. India was partitioned first as an experiment in Hindu-Muslim division in 1905. Bengal was divided on communal lines. It was annulled later on, but it was divided on communal lines. So this is something which happens in 1947, was going on from 1906 as a project between the Muslims and the Muslim League and the British. Congress actually struggled to fight against these two. Congress was not fighting against the British alone. They were fighting against the Muslim League and the British. The Muslim religious nationalism came to define the identity of Pakistan, while Hindu religious nationalism pressed for its mirror image for India. This is something which happens immediately at the time of the partition. However, our nationalist leaders like Gandhi, Patel, Nehru, Azad decided to go along with inclusive nationalism, where no one was an object of hate or felt excluded. All those who wanted a Hindu Rashtra in 1947 waited for decades. Unfortunately, now is the time for them to spread vicious otherness against the minorities. While indulging in this devious campaign, the Hindutva foot soldiers revel to and celebrate our iconic revolutionaries, Bhagat Singh and Netaji Bose. This we keep seeing every day. They just limit themselves conveniently to their martyrdom and nationalism while ignoring their intellectual legacy. Bhagat Singh had a vision of India where there was no space for this sort of hate mongering, which the rebels indulge every day. He was indeed a nationalist par excellence, but what was that nationalism he espoused? We need to see the definition of that. He left behind a huge corpus of writings which can help us to comprehend his nationalist vision. This is necessary to do in the current context where nationalism is touted as an all encompassing ideology. This unbridled nationalism uses religion as a pivot to define it, often using majoritarian religion and nationalism interchangeably. The hate-filled communalists venerate Bhagat Singh as a nationalist, but seldom care to ponder that religion for him was irrelevant. When he writes, "Why am an atheist?" and and writes about his engagement with the whole idea of God, and says clearly that in this modern world we don't need God at all. So if he declares himself an atheist, then how can he be a nationalist according to the definition of the Hindutva? If religion is the basis of nationalism, then Bhagat Singh cannot be a nationalist for them. It is not possible because he is a proclaimed atheist. And so was Savarkar, actually. He shared Dr. Ambedkar's vision, who once said that I do not want that our loyalty as Indians should be in the slightest way affected by any competitive loyalty, whether that loyalty arises out of our religion, out of our culture, or out of our language. I want all people to be Indians first, Indians last, and then nothing else for Indians. Bhagat Singh stood for an inclusive nationalism, which did not mean just politically inclusive, but socially and economically inclusive as well. And Subhash Bose is another revolutionary who is venerated by our neo-nationalists today. However, then they have no concern about the ideals Bose stood for. Subhash Bose is lauded as a romantic revolutionary with a mystique attached to his persona. However, not much is discussed or debated about his idea of India. His unequivocal antipathy towards divisive politics during freedom struggle, his inclusive nationalism and dislike for communalism is reflected in most of his writings and utterances. Bose was categorical when he said that communalism will go only when communal mentality goes. To destroy communalism is therefore the task of all Indians, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, etc., who have transcended the communal outlook and have developed a genuine nationalist mentality. So, for all those who remained on the margins of the freedom struggle, yet claim to be the prime nationalists today, Bose unequivocally proclaimed that he undoubtedly has a genuine nationalist mentality who wages a war for national freedom. Now, this was very clear. I mean, he makes it clear for the people, for the RSS, who talk about nation and nation building and nationalism, etc. He says only those people can be nationalists who have participated in building that nation. No, people who remain on the margins can't claim to be nationalists. It's not possible. This is Subhash Bose, and he writes this in Haripura session, Haripura 1938 presidential address, and it's a long one, and one should actually read it. And that's where he says lots of things, much more, many things in detail. His newfound admirers and hate-filled jingoists have no use for this revolutionary legacy, which is in total contrast with their divisive, hateful agenda. Most of these people, when they for me, it is difficult to say where all this will lead us. I have tried to touch upon most of these hate-filled ideologies at different premises. It is difficult to say where all this will lead us. All depends on the intent of the state and other vital institutions. We should play an important role in putting a halt to this madness. We need a larger political and cultural mobilization against hate speech. Otherwise, it is going to wreak havoc and destroy our social and economic fabric. We can already feel the disastrous impact of the toxicity in and around we live. Thank you. I should end here. We can take it forward in discussion.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Habib, for this very important uh, lecture and reflection, rather than we should call it a reflection on our times,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we rarely reflect on our times and we often talk about the past and not the present. Where
Yeah.
you about I was making notes as you were making so many interesting and important points, that how history is being used to generate hate, and the role of social media, and also the dangers of social media, both sides of the coin
Yeah, yeah.
you look at, because social media has democratized history to a certain extent that there are lots of pages now on social media that talks of history, but
Yeah,
all talk of academic history. That's becoming a problem.
yeah, yeah,
You mentioned about James Mill, our favorite guy from colonial times,
yeah, yeah,
referring to, and you talked about, you mentioned the word golden age, which has become quite common these days.
yeah, yeah,
Everybody wants to go back to the golden age, but nobody knows where that golden age was. As you mentioned, what happens to Buddhist history is a travesty.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the whole question of temple destruction in that sense also becomes a very important issue to look at, because according to sources, Buddhist temples were also demolished.
yeah, yeah. There's so many instances. People keep talking about that, but they conveniently ignore it.
Yeah. And according to some sources, Marathas also destroyed temples.
Yeah,
And
yeah, 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 yeah.
so there are, I think Professor Richard Eaton talks about it in his works.
Marathas destroyed temples in the south, and Tipu Sultan got them rebuilt.
Yeah.
No? Somebody who is demonized every day, he saved the temples, which or rebuilt them. Uh,
It is safe to say that one cannot simplify history, because history is
yeah,
very complex. There are no enemies, or there are no heroes.
yeah,
Everybody
yeah,
has uh, different achievements and their bad points, or whatever you want to call it, points to say. Everybody has a gray area, as they
yeah.
say. So I think I'll open the floor for the Q&A from audience. Vidya has a question. Vidya, I'll just unmute you. You can put your before that, before you read out your question, I'll just end the live which is going on YouTube, because the Q&A is exclusively for those who have registered for the workshop.
Sure,
If you want to be part, you can write your questions on caravanheritage@gmail.com. We'll forward them to Professor Habib, and he can get back to you
sure.
through email. But what we tried to say here is, please don't fall for the propaganda that is being served. History is not so simple. History, as I always say, history unites people more than it divides. So one has to understand the unifying
Yeah, yeah,
part of this discipline, that also teaches us the importance of plurality of opinions. One can have different ideas of history
yeah, yeah.
according to different interpretations of how you look at the past. And we always thank intellectuals like Professor S. Irfan Habib, who keeps the flame glowing even in these harshest times, for young people and for everybody who is interested in history. These are inspirations for us. So thank you so much, Professor Habib, for
Thank you, thank you.
and now I'll just stop the live so that